Our next session is moderated by Janet Coates, Managing Director of the Consortium on Trust in Media and Technology here at the University of Florida. Janet has had an illustrious career running newsrooms as well as in academia. She's been a top editor in newsrooms from Kansas to Florida, served as Dean of Faculty at the Poynter Institute, Executive Director for Innovation and Strategy at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University. She's joined today by two reporters who helped lead their reporting teams through very different and groundbreaking investigations that were honored with awards in the 2025 Collier Prize competition. Grace Hauck is an investigative reporter with the Illinois Answer Project State Investigations Team. She previously worked for USA Today in Chicago in various roles, including breaking news, enterprise, and criminal justice reporting. She led the reporting team on Strap Down, Restraint Chairs in Illinois' Jails, a project that exposed overuse, misuse, and abuse of restraint chairs in county jails across Illinois. Mike Hixenbaugh is a senior investigative reporter for NBC News. Mike has won numerous national honors for his reporting at NBC News, including the George R. Polk Award, an Edward R. Murrow Award, and a Peabody Award. He began his reporting career at newspapers in Ohio, North Carolina, Virginia, and Texas. He was a lead reporter in Dealing the Dead, a year-long NBC News investigation into the body brokering industry, which took second place in the 2025 Collier Prize competition. In this session, they'll share what it took to document and tell those important stories. Janet?
Thank you, Rick. We're just going to hop right to here with Grace is going to talk to us about her story and how she did it, how the team did it, and what the result was. So, Grace?
Sure. So I will start by just saying, again, I'm an investigative reporter with the Illinois Answers Project. We're a nonprofit newsroom in Illinois. We're actually a member of the Institute for Nonprofit News. And we worked on this project with a ton of people at Illinois Answers as well. I'll go back. As well as with Shaw Media, staff of Illinois Answers, interns. So I'm on stage today, but there were a ton of people who worked on this project. I have never done a project quite like this before. I've also never presented at something like this, so I just want to say open to feedback. I'm going to walk you through what we did and how we did it, but I'm sure there was probably a better and more efficient way to do it. So if anyone wants to offer some thoughts or comments at the end. So we investigated the use of restraint chairs in Illinois county jails, and that started with the Illinois Answers Project's state initiative that we launched a little over 2 years ago. Dean Brown earlier was mentioning the DIL report that comes out every year, and last year that report found that over the past 20 years, Illinois had seen an 86% decline in the number of working journalists, and that was the highest rate of decline of any state, and we felt that pretty acutely in Illinois, and so in response, we've been trying to fill some of those gaps in watchdog reporting across the state, working on statewide investigations, but also hyper-local investigations, often in partnership with the outlets that remain, the small number of existing outlets still across Illinois. And so when I came on, I partnered with Shaw Media. They have the Northwest Herald. Amanda Marazzo is based there, and she introduced me to this man named Vernon Brooks, and this is Vernon with his wife Mary. Vernon had come to them saying, hey, I was, through this really unfortunate series of events, arrested and brought to the county jail and strapped down in a restraint chair, which was a really traumatic experience for him. We go into the details of Vernon's story in our first piece in the series to kind of summarize it really briefly for you all. His father is a Chicago police officer. He's a Navy veteran. He had a criminal damage to property charge that he had done 10 or 15 hours of community service for, and he'd done that at a local church. He'd completed all his paperwork, sent the paperwork to the pastor. The pastor forgot to submit that paperwork. And so a warrant went out for his arrest, and later, when Vernon was arrested, he was out with his wife, Mary, at the time. He was terrified and shocked because he thought he had done everything right. He did his community service. So he thought he was being arrested for no reason, and he believed he was being targeted and arrested because he's black. So when he was brought to McHenry County Jail, he was freaking out, he was not complying, and so staff there strapped him down in what is known as a restraint chair. These are, according to manufacturer guidelines, state policies, national standards, only supposed to be used in emergency situations as a last resort to restrain someone if they're a danger to themselves, others, or property. But you have groups like the United Nations Committee Against Torture and Amnesty International, who for decades have said these should not be used as a method of restraining people in custody because they're prone to misuse and abuse. So what we did is Amanda and I initially interviewed Vernon about what happened. Vernon was strapped down for about 3.5 hours. He said the restraints cut off his circulation, that he suffered PTSD from this incident. He was terrified, he didn't know what was happening, and he also has lasting nerve damage from this incident. So our partner paper wanted to know, well, how often does this happen across the state, and how long are people actually restrained for? Like, how do we put this in context? So that's what we decided we would do, is to figure that out. So my coworker, Casey Toner, knew that these reports of extraordinary or unusual occurrences existed in Illinois. When any number of events happen inside an Illinois jail, the jail's supposed to fill this out and send this to the standards unit for jails in Illinois, and that actually exists within the Department of Corrections. Like many states, our prison system oversees our jail system, which is a little crazy. And so Casey said, hey, there's this restraints used box on this report. That could be a way maybe to quickly quantify how often restraints are used, how often restraint chairs are used. And so Casey had been collecting a bunch of these over several years for a different purpose, but we thought, hey, if we run it through Google Pinpoint, which maybe some of you have used here, it's a tool that allows you to essentially take a standardized form and spit that out into a spreadsheet, something more easily workable. We thought, let's try that and see if we can just quickly use that system to give us a sense of how often people are being restrained. But when we did that, we ran into a few problems. The output from Google Pinpoint was really messy, and a lot of these documents in Illinois County jails are handwritten. Pinpoint was struggling to pick up on that handwriting, and we quickly realized that a lot of jails were missing from this data set, suggesting that either they weren't restraining people in chairs or they weren't reporting it at all. And so we knew if we went with this route, we'd have to clean it up a lot, and we'd really getting a subset of the total picture. So we thought, okay, well, let's just do the big version, which is to go to every single county in the state and request the records from them directly. In Illinois, we have 102 counties, 92 county jails. So we requested records over this 5-year period, 2019 to 2023, because I started this story in 2024. We obtained tens of thousands of pages of reports. And so we're talking about a lot of different types of records. So it's incident reports, but also logs, policies, individual county guidelines on the use of restraint chairs, some lawsuit settlement information. We sued one county, and we're actually still in the process of the lawsuit with another county, even a 1.5 years later. I don't know if Dave will approve of this, but this is my FOIA tracker for public records. Thought I would share it just for the students in the room in case that is helpful. This is how I was tracking the hundreds of FOIA requests to the counties by year, and then also had tabs for the problem counties, follow-ups, and eventual no surprises letters that we sent to them. So I think we're missing a slide, but essentially what we did is we built a database in Google Sheets. It was kind of like my poor man's version of how do we put this together and build this, and we tracked various trends. So the prior slide had shown just the name of the county, the incident date, and then also we were looking at, when were they put in the chair, when were they taken out of the chair, and how long were they in there, and then we could create buckets of duration, essentially. We interviewed dozens of people for this. I think we're maybe missing one other slide too, but there was a slide in here somewhere showing just the records and the handwriting on them. A lot of these records, every county has a different format. Some it's just a lined piece of paper with handwriting. So we had to do a lot of go back and forth with the counties to be like, hey, I think this is what this says. Is this what this says? Some people would enter time in different ways. So someone might write in 7 o'clock, but some people use military time, some didn't. So it might look like someone was restrained in a chair for 24 hours, but actually it was only 4 or whatever it might be. And so there was a lot of back and forth, especially when it came to the handwriting. So these are some of the folks that we interviewed who had been strapped down to chairs, and as I'll mention in a minute, a lot of these folks were dealing with mental illness or were overdosing at the time. This is Ashley, Bryce, and Samantha. And what we ultimately found is that over this 5-year time period in Illinois, almost every day, someone somewhere in the state was strapped down to a restraint chair, which is kind of crazy to think about because this is a device that, again, the UN said should not be used at all. And so we're able to find 5,500 incidents. We found that jails consistently violated their own policies, state standards, and manufacturer guidelines. We found that there were incidents where people were physically injured and traumatized by these restraints. 4 minors were restrained. Some people were restrained repeatedly. Some people were restrained for days on end, up to 7 days in a restraint chair. And one man, was put in a chair 40 times. Typically what was happening is staff in county jails, they're typically understaffed, and what we know is happening in this country, and especially in Illinois, is we've shut down most of our psychiatric facilities, so jails and prisons have become de facto mental health hospitals, and so you're getting a lot of people with severe mental illnesses who are being arrested, brought in. Staff typically don't have the training or just the manpower to deal with all these folks. There's often limited nurses or doctors on call, let alone on staff. And so staff were using the restraint chairs to deal with people if they didn't have enough people to watch someone, or we had a number of incidents where someone was strapped into a chair on like a Friday night and the nurse doesn't come back until Monday morning, so they were just in a restraint chair all weekend. Hundreds of cases, there was also the use of a taser or some other use of force in that process. One county, Coles County, which we did a story on, strapped people down and then put on a stun cuff, which shocked people. And if someone was in a restraint chair and they tried to get out or they were screaming, the county would then remotely from the control room shock them while they were in that restraint chair. Half of those incidents were never reported in those extraordinary and unusual occurrences forms that I showed you originally. So if we had gone with that route, we only would have captured half of the total picture. So we were able to show that gap in underreporting, and also, even when those forms do go to that state standards unit, it's not clear that they do anything with them. I hope that they read them, but they certainly don't make any data out of them, which other states do. Here's an example of just how we were able to bucket those durations. One of the leading manufacturers of that chair that I showed you originally, they put a 10-hour cap on how long someone can be restrained based on their own research, what's safe. There's a lot of concerns about suffocation, pulmonary embolisms, like blood clots. People will die if they're restrained for too long. And so we found at least 70 incidents where people were restrained for over 10 hours. Here are just some of the stories we did. I think we did maybe like 11 in total. You'll see the one about Coles County, Samantha again here in Madison County, which is right outside St. Louis on the Illinois side. They were notable because they had the most extremely long incidents. Champaign County, that was difficult getting records from them because they had printed out hard copies, brought them to the basement of an annex facility. So it took months to even get those records from them, and they had not been reporting any of them to the state. And so after our story, they started reporting. And what's shocking, in Cook County, the jail in Chicago, the jail that has been historically one of the largest in the country and was at one time the largest mental health facility in our country, had almost 900 incidents over this 5-year period and didn't report any of them to the state. We built a bunch of interactive tools, allowing people to see what's happening in their county, looking at their county's policy. And we also made a zine. This was my coworker Meredith Newman's idea. She had gone to an IRE or an ICAR and had seen an outlet in Arizona, made a really cool zine. So we made several versions of these. We had hard copies with staples that we would give to the general public. We made those in English and in Spanish. And then we made really thin, soft copies without staples that we were able to send to people in jails and prisons who we know had been restrained in a chair, because the main concern for us is we've done all this reporting, that the people who probably need it the most probably don't have access to it. And so we sent that directly to hundreds of people, also included information about how would you FOIA for your own records, like how would you even get the incident reports and the logs. And then we did 3 solution stories, which we're now calling investigating responses, because we're not actually proposing solutions, we're just investigating how have other places around the country responded to the same problem. We highlighted California, Iowa, and Pennsylvania, showing how they approach things like transparency, accountability, data collection differently, how they've made changes to state regulations. And in Allegheny County, actually in Pennsylvania, they have so much public data and they had so much education around this issue that they put a ballot, had a ballot measure that passed to ban the use of restraint chairs in Allegheny County Jail, and we were then able to assess how did that happen, and also what happens when you do ban the use of restraint chairs in a large county jail that is probably comparable to something that we see in Illinois. So the impact, we had counties that were updating their policies, have started reporting to the state now for lawmakers speaking out about this issue. Now every year when IDOC, Department of Corrections inspectors are inspecting jails, if they're not actually reporting those extraordinary and unusual occurrences, they'll cite them for that now. For years, they were not reporting and the Department of Corrections wouldn't cite them at all. At least one person who was restrained who filed a federal civil rights complaint has cited our data in his lawsuit. We've spurred conversations among different disability rights organizations. There are also a lot of individual level impacts that are hard to capture in a presentation like this, but one that comes to mind is this woman, Ashley, who I showed you her photo earlier. She, since we did this story, has gone back to school and was in a writing class and wrote an essay about her experience being restrained in a chair and what she thinks should happen in the state to prevent that from happening again. And I get ongoing calls from lawyers, sources, people around the country who are also trying to seek information about restraint chairs. And ultimately, after we published our first story, it took about 9 months to do that, I got a call from Matt Fleener, who's an investigative reporter at KMBC TV in Kansas City. And he said, hey, I've been thinking about the use of restraint chairs ever since I covered the death of someone in one of those years ago. We want to do something similar. So we just shared notes with Matt. They ended up replicating our investigation in Kansas and Missouri. But because we have very different public records laws, we were able to get much more information than they were, and we were able to do it very cheaply, whereas they were cited hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to replicate the same thing in Kansas and Missouri. But they put together an amazing documentary. I got to speak in that, and that has spurred a ton of changes in Kansas and Missouri as a result. Some quick tips and lessons before I pass it to Mike, especially for the students in the room. For journalists, this might be obvious, but this was some helpful lessons learned for me that I just wanted to share. That if a document exists within more than one agency, request it from all agencies possible, because they may include different numbers of pages that you didn't know existed, or they might redact certain things. Like we commonly would get different redactions from the counties than we would from the state, and sometimes that was essential because we would get a first name that ended up allowing us to actually track that person down and talk with them. Keep a very organized and updated FOIA tracker or public records tracker, and a reporting diary, because if you're working on something for 9 months and you're like, oh, who did I call in January and what exactly did they say? You think you're going to remember, but you will not. So you have to write it down. Keep a really organized data dictionary and data diary, especially because we were building this database manually, and so when it came to fact-checking, that was a huge endeavor that involved a lot of people, and if I had more, accurately tracked every single adjustment I made to that spreadsheet, it would have been a lot easier and faster. And if you're coding something, that's going to be fine. I'm sure all your changes and updates will be captioned in code, but I'm not that advanced, so this would have been really helpful. As soon as your records come in, check all pages, especially if it's like a 100-page document. I had a couple where I quickly would scan the first few. I was like, okay, great, I'll read this in a week. By the time I actually did, I realized there were a few blurry pages in there, and then you have to go back to the FOIA officer, and it becomes this whole protracted conversation, whereas if I had just checked it immediately and had that officer's attention, I would have gotten the results much faster. And then request video and photo as soon as possible. If you're going to sue as soon as possible. Like I said, like it's been a year and a half, and we're still ongoing with this one county. And then always send that final no surprises letter. When I sent those to all the counties with, here are our findings, your final chance to comment on this, there was one county that said, hey, there's absolutely no way we used a restraint chair that many times. Let me go back to my folks, give you a more accurate response. They went back and they said, wow, actually, yeah, we did use it that many times. I had no idea. But it's always helpful to do that just in case, God forbid, you found something wrong, you can get called out on it before you publish. Mike?
Good job. Thanks. Grace, that is an incredible work of journalism and on behalf of vulnerable people in your state. So congratulations and thank you for doing that. I'm Mike Hixenbaugh. Yes. That's great. As Rick mentioned, I'm a national reporter with NBC News. My background is in print journalism. I worked at newspapers. And I work for NBC News Digital, which means my main job is still writing, but I work at a broadcast company, so I do have some videos in my presentation. My colleagues and I at NBC News last year published an investigation called Dealing the Dead that uncovered how a Texas medical school was acquiring the bodies of unclaimed dead people. So these are largely homeless individuals, people who are estranged from family, maybe they suffer from mental health issues. Their bodies go unclaimed, and in these two Texas counties, a large medical school was receiving them and then using them not only to train medical students, but then leasing out and selling excess bodies to med tech companies, making tens of thousands of dollars. And so I'm gonna talk through what led us to this investigation, how we did it, and then give an idea for how literally any newsroom in the country could do a version of this story. To help bring some closure to families. And so this story began, my colleague John Schuppe had been doing some reporting in Mississippi where he had found a family was desperately searching for their missing, a mom actually was desperately searching for her missing son, a guy named Dexter Wade. And John discovered that Dexter Wade had been hit by a police cruiser while crossing the street, and that the county coroner, apparently without making any attempt to find his family, declared him unclaimed and buried him in a pauper's grave. And so that reporting, first of all, got a lot of attention nationally, but raised a question for us, which was, is that happening to other people? So John obtained the list of unclaimed bodies buried at that cemetery in Jackson, Mississippi, and he and I joined him at this point. We started going through the list and quickly discovered that there were others on the list. There was one individual, there was a family actively searching for him at the county over. They'd filed missing person report with the sheriff. So there's people actively searching in law enforcement. In one county, the county over, his body was declared unclaimed and buried without any kind of marker in an open field. And so we did that reporting, and this is how journalism works. Often one question leads to another. And so my question was, well, if that's happening in Jackson, Mississippi, how are other counties across the country working to notify families when they receive a body and there's not immediately someone to claim it? What we discovered was every year across America, tens of thousands of people die alone and are deemed unclaimed by county governments. And there's a wide range in terms of what county governments across the country do to find next of kin. Just to put it in context, when someone is in this situation, often they are someone who's struggling with homelessness, addiction, mental health struggles that lead to family estrangement. But when you talk to people who've gone through this, estrangement doesn't mean indifference. There are families who often are just, if they had known, they would have had a funeral. They would have claimed the remains. And what we discovered in that initial reporting was that when you publish the names of unclaimed individuals, unclaimed bodies, some percentage of families will see that name online through a Google search and discover that their loved one is dead and claim them. And when you don't publish those names, then people who have family who are looking for them are left in the dark. And so while we were reporting that, there's different types of outcomes for when this happens. Unclaimed bodies get put into a pauper field, or sometimes they're just cremated and scattered at sea. A colleague of mine, Susan Carroll, who unfortunately passed away before we could finish this reporting, discovered a research paper out of Texas that seemed really interesting in this context. It said that unclaimed bodies in the state of Texas increasingly were being used for medical research. And so we thought, wait, is it possible that people's bodies are being used for research while their families are actively searching for them? We dug into that and soon discovered that this big increase in the number of unclaimed bodies being used for research in Texas was being driven by a single medical school, the University of North Texas Health Science Center. And again, at the beginning of this, our hypothesis was, well, if these individuals are being used in this way, it's a good chance that there are family members who don't know this, who don't know that their loved one is dead and that they have been used for research. And so to report this story, we filed many records requests to the medical school, which is a state institution, to the county governments that had struck a deal with the medical school. Tarrant and Dallas counties had struck this deal. Rather than having the counties pay the expense of cremating or burying unclaimed individuals, they could just give it to the medical school and save millions of dollars. The medical school gets bodies that they need for research. So we filed FOIA requests to the counties and to a state agency that oversees the handling of bodies used for research. Every state has different ways of handling this. In Texas, there was a group called the State Anatomical Board, and then later the Texas State Funeral Commission that is supposed to track when a body is used for research. And often, this industry called the body brokering business. I had no idea, but it's a multi-billion-dollar industry in America. Body parts are needed to train doctors to develop devices. And so this university was taking these unclaimed homeless individuals, in many cases cutting up their bodies and shipping different parts to different parts of the country. And while we were reporting that, we partnered with, again, NBC News. We worked with the folks at NBC Nightly News to put this in front of a national broadcast audience in addition to our written story. I'm going to show you a quick clip from that.
Dr. Carl Honey was a U.S. military veteran who served in the Army for nearly a decade.
He was very friendly. He was outgoing, a nice dresser.
After being honorably discharged, he began struggling with mental illness and homelessness. Then in 2022, he died of an apparent heart attack while living alone on the streets of Dallas. Honey was entitled to a burial with military honors, but instead, something else happened.
I think they think, homeless black man, he ain't got no family. They don't care about him. You were wrong about this one.
An NBC News investigation has found that Honey was among more than 2,300 people who died in the Dallas-Fort Worth region and were given to a state medical school that used and made money off their body parts, at times as their own families searched for them. For Honey, within a month of his death, the Dallas Medical Examiner's Office deemed him unclaimed, reporting phones for family members they tried were disconnected. And yet, he did have relatives, some living right there in Dallas. His ex-wife, Kimberly, and their 2 adult children say they had even visited Honey in a hospital months prior to his death.
To hear that your ex-husband has been deemed an unclaimed person, what's your reaction to that?
That's crazy. We're here. We've always been here. His son has his same name. How could he be unclaimed?
This is where Victor Honey's body was then taken, the University of North Texas Health Science Center, where, according to government documents, his body was then frozen, cut into pieces, and sent out to different medical groups across the country, all without his prior consent or his family's knowledge. Those documents show Honey's severed right leg sent to a Swedish medical device maker for $341. His torso shipped to a medical education company in Pittsburgh, which paid $900. And for $210, a pair of bones from his skull went to the U.S. Army for military medical training.
Great. So before we published that story, there was quite a bit of impact. For months, the medical school and the counties defended what they were doing. They said this was a great bargain for taxpayers. we don't have to pay to bury these bodies, and we're training our future doctors. I think Grace mentioned this idea of a no surprises letter. So before we publish a major investigation, we send pretty much a detailed list, and it is what it sounds like. We don't want anyone to be surprised by what we publish. There's an ethical reason for that, but also a practical reason. We want to know if we got something wrong. And so we sent a very detailed list of our findings. And again, after months of the medical school staff saying, this is a great thing, you've got this wrong, right before we were ready to publish, the university announced that they were suspending the World Body Program, firing everybody who led it, and launching internal investigation to how this was allowed to happen, which was very rewarding, especially for the families who we spoke to. I mentioned that part of what we did was gathering records, and so some of the core records we got was a list of the unclaimed bodies. And we requested that list from the medical school, from all of the counties, and also from that state agency I mentioned. And we were able to combine those spreadsheets to kind of paint a complete picture of what bodies were used, how they were used, how they were, in that case, cut up and leased out or sold. But after we published it, we realized we just highlighted a handful of cases where the way we found the Honey family was we got a list of names, we just started calling, doing searches online to find family members and calling them. We were doing what the county should have done, which is reaching family members and notifying them that their loved one was dead in some cases, and then that this is what had happened to them. We did that in a number of cases. We realized if we just published the list of names, then it might bring closure to a lot more families. And so we did that. We published a list of 1,800 names where we knew that family hadn't been reached, and very quickly started hearing from people who were writing emails saying, I'll show you one right now. I did not know my brother was dead.
We're home, settled in, and we turned the news on.
For Tim Leggett, it was the most unexpected way to find out his brother Dale had died.
We like to get here in time to see Lester, and the story comes on about dealing the dead.
It is a disturbing story out of Texas.
It was our investigation into a local medical school, the University of North Texas Health Science Center, and how it made millions in part by taking in unclaimed bodies from Dallas and Tarrant counties and then leasing out those body parts, often without consent, for medical training and research, at times as their own loved ones search for them.
And I'm thinking, okay, well, that's interesting. I feel very sorry for those people. And then they said, if you want to see more about the story or look at the list of names, go to our website.
And so Tim did, both out of a curiosity and a nagging feeling about his brother.
Thinking, well, it has been a little while since I've seen Dale, and I know he lives by himself. I know he's very, very much a loner.
To his shock, there among some 1,800 names of unclaimed bodies given to the center and published by NBC News was Denzel Leggett, Dale.
So I had a long moment of crying and tears because that's how I found out about my brother's death.
Right.
So I'm dealing with it.
We ended up hearing, I don't know when that story was published, probably from a dozen people, maybe 20. I get emails from this because of this list a couple times a month, and this has been more than a year now. And it shows that when you release the names of unclaimed dead people, that you will, if you fail to reach family, then the family might find you and get closure. And so that's what I want to talk about briefly, is how any newsroom, student newsroom, can do a version of this, and it's not that difficult. There's a federal system called NamUs that county coroners and police upload unclaimed bodies, unidentified bodies, and missing persons onto these three data sets. And the data sets are supposed to speak to each other, so that if you have a missing person report in one state or county and you have an unclaimed body in another county, you'll get a hit that says, oh, this missing person's actually over here in Jackson, Mississippi. What we found was, just like these two counties, Dallas and Tarrant counties, many large and medium-sized and especially small counties don't post names of unclaimed bodies. They do their initial checks to call family, maybe, if they do that, and then that's the end of it. And so you can do this. If you check NamUs and see if your jurisdiction or counties in your area aren't regularly posting names of unclaimed individuals to NamUs, then you can do it. You can request that from the county coroner in your state. Most states it's public, and you can publish the names. You can even go through the list of names and check it yourself against missing person reports and maybe solve some cases. Report those stories, publish the names, and it will lead to closure for families. There's actually I know this is true at the local level because there's a newspaper reporter at the Bucks County Courier-Times who for years, long before we did this project, has been doing exactly that. She figured this out and has been publishing her own list of unclaimed bodies in her region outside of Philadelphia, and has brought closure to dozens of families. And so this is like the heart of, I think, public service journalism. If you can step in where the government has chosen not to, and help families learn what happened to their loved ones. And I'm happy to chat with anyone afterward if you want some ideas about how you can do that. And so here's my contact info. I'm happy to answer any questions and talk through that. I wanted to say at the top, and I forgot to, I want to say thank you to the University of Florida and the Collier family for doing this. These types of prizes, we always say this, we don't do this journalism for awards. Clearly, those stories are much more important than accolades, but it does help. Doing these projects are stressful. The reporting, you're making people angry sometimes. We get mean notes afterward a lot of the times, and it's being recognized helps us power through that. It also encourages newsroom leaders. Even though we don't do this for awards, newsroom leaders really love awards, and so by giving this recognition and these honors, you're creating incentive in newsrooms to do really big, important reporting that maybe doesn't make all the money back from the investment into it. So anyway, thank you for doing this.
Thank you both for telling us these stories and for telling these stories to the world. This is the kind of work where journalists speak for people who cannot speak for themselves or aren't listened to. So thank you so much for your work. I want to start with that piece of it. I think when we think about, requesting public records and data journalism, it's very easy to get focused on the records and the process, like we're in Spotlight, running down the list of priests in the directory. How do you keep the humanity at the center of this kind of reporting? I'm looking out at the audience and people are like bodies cut up, people in chairs for that long. How do you keep that human piece at the forefront in your work?
Well, I think for every story we tell,
You've got to laugh.
Oh.
Okay. Nope, you're good.
I'm good?
Yeah.
Every story we do a lot of narrative work, so we always build it around someone or multiple people, especially in a given area or facility. We try to include a lot of photo, and we did some video. I think that's something that I think your work, Mike, does really, really well, is having that visceral kind of video content, and I saw that with Matt Fleener's work too when he did the documentary. It's something that we try to do, but I think we could have done more of, is more in-person video, so we're trying to do that more, because I think people really connect with that. But visually, we just try to tell the stories narratively, tell you about these people, how they got to this point. I know I summarized Vernon's situation very quickly, but in the longer story, you get to know him, you get to know his wife, Mary, and just more about his background and the way that this has affected his life. He is an artist as well. And after this happened to him, for over a year, he could not make any art. He could not draw, he could not paint. And he was just traumatized and frustrated, and he felt stuck, and he felt like nobody was listening. But I think visuals can do a lot of that work for you too, and audio too. That's something that we want to explore with more.
I think for us, the humanity's at the center. I want the humanity to be at the center of any story we tell. And so for this project in particular, it's a list of 2,000 some names. And once you make that first phone call where you're on the phone with somebody and you explain that, I recall one, a veteran who was estranged from his kids, kind of a loner, and I called his daughter and explained that he was dead and that this had happened. Once you have that phone call, you realize this is the heart of the story. Mm-hmm. And for us, both in the written piece and in the television pieces, the surviving families, their stories and their voices are essential to cut through cynicism that exists in society. That's just kind of this reflexive, oh, well, their unclaimed body, well, didn't you love him? Why was he unclaimed? Why weren't you in touch with him? You should have been a better family. That's the knee-jerk reflex that people have to this type of reporting. And for yours also, why are they in jail? Maybe they deserved it. That is something that we hear, and that you can mitigate and cut through by giving people voice and saying, well, we told Victor Honey's story in 5,000 words and explained his path from Gulf War veteran to dying alone homeless in Dallas. And it was a story of societal failure, mental health, and a family that cared for him. And in the end, a government that didn't provide for him while he was alive, but did cash in on his remains after he was dead. And I think for people who, it's really hard to hear those stories and read those stories in depth and not realize the injustice.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that really struck me about both the work that both of you and your teams did is the effort to get the information to the people most directly affected. It's amazing to me the effort to get it to people in jails and do it in a way that's actionable for them, kind of giving them the tools to do some of that work themselves. And for your story, Mike, publishing the lists and giving people that opportunity to kind of do their own reporting. What was the thought process and how you connect directly to the people who most need that information and who might not otherwise intersect with your journalism?
I think, as I mentioned, for us and the zine that we made, that was my coworker Meredith's idea that came out of a journalism conference because she's seen that work really well in Arizona. It might have been the Arizona Luminaria who had done a really, really good piece. And so for us, as we were talking with people too, we realized people didn't know that jails were violating standards. If they were restrained, they experienced this as something deeply traumatic, sometimes something that injured them, something that they felt was unjust, and often said, how was this allowed in the United States of America? But then they didn't know that the manufacturer had a time limit for things like that. So there were some essential pieces of information that they needed, whether they were going to file a complaint or a lawsuit, or even if they just wanted to figure out, hey, this record exists of what happened to you. There's one county, actually, that never made a single record. Didn't even file an incident report when they used the restraint chair, so that county's a black box for us. But the thought was, the people who need this most, we know who they are, we have their names, and so it was kind of a group effort to create that resource and have this mailing campaign. And I think for us, we were trying to be careful of the line of where does that step into advocacy versus just reaching our audience. And I think we handled that well. But it's also really challenging because in Illinois right now, there's a lot of concerns about paper flowing into facilities, and a lot of mail now is being scanned and given to people in tablets. So we were able to get some of those in, but we also faced a lot of challenges working with the different facilities to make sure that they would accept the soft copy version that we were sending.
Well, for us, I think it's this, we have this list of 2,000 some names, and our initial approach to it was, okay, let's sort through this and start calling some see if we can find families for some of these people. It's a team of two, pulling up Nexus and looking through people finder sites for phone numbers and using a genealogy site. And we did have a lot of success in sorting through that and finding people on social media or finding phone numbers and making those direct notifications. But we weren't going to go through 2,000 names. We weren't going to do that, but we knew from our reporting that by publishing the names that would create an opportunity for people to find their own loved ones on here. So it was really just how can we do the most good, and yeah, I think that has had more impact than anything. In my, at least from my perspective, because I get the emails. My email's on that list, on that underneath that list. If you find your loved one here and want to talk to a reporter, I get those emails. We're no longer writing about it, but I do reply to give information about who to contact to try to reclaim your loved one's remains, to try to get the records, to explain. I share what records I've got if I have any, and often I do. But also how could you find out what happened? And I think that gets to there is a public service to what we do, or there should be.
Right. Each of you talked some about when the story went in a direction that maybe you didn't anticipate, or you just made this kind of, oh my gosh, discovery. Can you talk a little bit about how you keep open to that kind of thing? I tell my students a lot about prosecuting a story, that you need to be, may have a theory of the case, but you've got to prosecute it. How did you prosecute the information to be open to those kinds of, this is going someplace I didn't think about?
I think for me it really took that turn when we discovered Coles County was using stun cuffs on people who were strapped down. Because that was, I never even heard of what that device is. For people who don't know, imagine like a shock collar for dogs, but for humans, kind of. They've been, outlawed in some areas. There was a high-profile case, maybe in Philadelphia court, within the past year or so, where someone had stun handcuffs that were banned from the courtroom. But I think that then became just a matter of having the time and resources to spend on going deeper, and that was an outlier county. We did find other counties using tasers, spit hoods, things like that, but Coles County seemed to be unique in the stun cuffs. But I think that also depends on the organization. Illinois Answers were built to do this longer-term investigative work, so I had the luxury to pursue that story and go deeper and talk to those people, and then talk to the new sheriff about what are they doing about this. So I think I got lucky in being able to follow that turn, whereas I know if you're working on stricter deadlines or you have a different outlet with different priorities, that may not be possible.
Right.
I think the earlier panel talked a lot about curiosity being a core trait that makes a successful journalist. And so for this story, I think we just kept kind of asking that next question. And it started with one dead person, right? One family, and we thought, well, is this happening to others in this town? And then after we did that, we're like, well, is this happening in every town or other towns? And that led us to the medical school. Yeah. And then along the way, I will say that we kept trying to scrutinize your own perspective. So I'm coming at this unclaimed bodies being used for student training. The university was making a compelling argument for why this is a public good. We got to train these doctors. I think I kept that idea in my mind, but as we dug more, we realized, well, you didn't notify the families before you took them, and two, it turns out you weren't just training students, you were creating a revenue center for the university, a revenue stream by building out this big bioskills lab and all this. There was a profit motive in it, and that changed, I think, how a lot of people saw the story as well.
Yeah, that was the shocking piece of it. I think when I looked at it was, you can make the argument about the training, but when you're cashing in, that's a little harder to argue. I'm not going to remember, Grace, the exact phrase that you used, but you talked about solutions as investigating,
there's a big trend of solutions journalism now, and our newsroom been trying to figure it out. Do we want to call it solutions journalism? Right. We've adapted the phrase investigating responses, because we don't want people to think that we're proposing solutions. We're actually just investigating what people have done and how people have responded.
So is that an element of kind of all the reporting you do? How important is it for you to be thinking about not just kind of throwing this out the window and seeing, here it is, but also including that element of here's what other people have done around this problem.
I mean, I think it's pretty essential, and it just harnesses the power of investigative journalism. You see a lot of outlets doing it now. I think the New York Times calls it Headway, and it's kind of just like a branding attached to a form of investigative journalism that's gaining a lot of popularity, but also, like Mike, you guys did that all too when you pointed to, hey, if some counties are actually just publishing this, that is a possible solution, that is a way forward, or what effect that has. And so for us, it seemed important not just to say, we're going to do the work of showing you the problem, but we're also going to do the work to show you how a variety of other places have tried to fix this or make it better. And I didn't want to spend a year and a half working on the problem piece and then just pick one solution to highlight, because then it feels like I'm advocating for a particular response. So we kind of did this buffet of 3 different states and what they've done. But I think it's always existed. It's just being branded now, maybe in a new way.
So as we get towards the end of this, I want to ask you about impact, but I want to ask it more from, not the laws changed and all of that, but personally, what was the thing that really, and Mike, you talked some about this, the thing that really moved you, the thing that made you really think, this is why I do this work? Was there somebody you heard from or some anecdote that you uncovered in doing this that made you say, yeah, this is why I get up in the morning and am a reporter?
Well, I mean, I think I touched on it some. I'm a human too. I have a family. I have 4 kids. I have a spouse. I have parents. And everyone I'm speaking to, as journalists, we put a little bit of space between ourselves for mental health reasons and for objectivity. But you have to let yourself empathize with people you're writing about. And so, I can put myself in these people's shoes. Can you imagine getting a call from a reporter across the country saying, "Hey, did you know your dad died?" Of course, we were, a lot gentler than that. I knew that matters. Like that beyond the Texas introducing laws and the university halting this practice. On the individual level, that mattered a lot. And we got such nice notes. Like, we don't always get nice notes. And we got such nice, thank you from people who we brought closure to. And so that feels good. And on a personal level, I think I mentioned up there, but my colleague and good friend, Susan Carroll, who found this research paper, who kind of conceived of this project, she tragically died in the midst of this. And I felt like this is the exact kind of work that she lived to do, that exposing injustice affecting the most marginalized people in our society. And so this particular project has, for me and my colleagues, felt like we were doing it on her behalf as well, finishing it on her behalf. And so, I felt a lot of big feelings around this.
Yeah, and I think for me, I also get a lot of those just like handwritten letters from jails and prisons of people just really thanking us for listening to them when they feel like they were largely shut out from a lot of other avenues for accountability or transparency, if they even existed at all. I mentioned, Ashley going back to school, and I think when people feel like being part of the investigative reporting process is about healing and empowerment and recovery more than extraction, I think that's a goal for me. And so if they feel better just having been part of the process of the story, even regardless of the story that publishes itself, that's kind of a win for me, and that is empowering. But I think a moment that I think about a lot is when the first story published, before we even had the zine to send to people, we sent just some print, double-sided copies folded up in an envelope to some sources. And in one prison in Illinois, the source brought it to the photocopy room and made dozens of photocopies and just started handing it out around the prison. And I think that to me was a moment of, wow, like this is so needed that they're gonna do that and share it with everyone. And the number of people who have been there who maybe have been in a restraint chair at some point and didn't have this information.
It's so powerful, and so I think so important for our student journalists to. I mean, it's very easy for us to fall into conversations about objectivity and here are the ethics of all of this, and that's all important. But the human piece of it is the reason we do this work, and the two of you are just such. You exemplify that, and your team exemplify that in such a powerful way.
Thank you.
The reporting is exceptional, and the human piece of it is at the core of that. So,
And journalists, be human first.
yes.
You're still a person, and if you lean into that, and it'll guide your reporting to better directions.
Yes. Well, thank you both for sharing this work.
Thank you.